They'll introduce themselves and start the presentation. Our webinar will be recorded and distributed through email after the webinar is over, as well as available on our website. If you have questions throughout the presentation, please use the Q&A box on the right-hand side of your window, and they'll be answered when the presentation is over. If you can't connect to the webinar at any point or the audio drops out, you can let me know through the chat box, or you can follow the instructions from the invite email. I'll go ahead and turn it over to Brian.
Hello, it's Brian Buell, and thanks for the introduction. Today, we're going to go through a topic that's pretty important to me personally and our company as we work with Justification Systems. I'm around implementing DITA technology. There's been a lot of talk, and we've done a lot of work with explaining what DITA is, how it benefit companies to automate their publishing processes. It doesn't do any good. You can't support within the organization to actually get a project started. So today, we really want to go through 3 or 4 points. So we'll go through a brief introduction, more detail about myself and Dakota Systems, spend a little bit of time talking about actually what is meant by DITA and DITA projects. This webinar assumes that you're familiar with, at least conceptually, you're familiar with structured writing and just systems and how managing and distributing technical documentation in XML and particularly DITA offers benefits. I'm going to focus on communicating those benefits, and in particular, when you encounter the most common objection is there's no sources to change the system that's in place. For the most people, theoretically agree that there's benefits to moving to a DITA-based publishing environment, but those theoretical benefits aren't sufficient enough to change the way companies do work. So we'll talk about the 3 or 4 steps that are necessary to actually get a project from concept into actual implementation. So a little bit about myself. I'm the managing director of Dakota Systems. In Chicago, we focus primarily helping technical publishing groups get their operations streamlined. Sometimes that means data conversion. Sometimes that means working closely with Justification Systems and XML, configuring an XML editing environment. Sometimes that means working on the content management piece or the publishing. The justification for really our company in general is, it's not sufficient to just come up with an idea that this is going to benefit a company and then selecting the editing, content management, and publishing tools. There's more to it, whether it's the data conversion, the integration piece, the training, or the support that often companies need to get jump-started. So we've been around for, I guess, our 14th year, and it's a growing need for the technical publication integration services. People need to be done. There's great products that handle points of the technical publication system, ecosystem, but put it all together, people still need help. Although we're located in Chicago, most of our work is in the U.S. This type of implementation is generally accepted. It's used across multiple industries around the world. We develop a lot of software ourselves. There's again companies that put together XML editing software, content management software, and publishing software. We work integrating them all together to get a custom solution. We did for about five years, and then it seemed like people need help with build themselves. We offered that as training in 2004, and we've seen that people need help run it from an operational support, and sometimes we host the systems, and that's been a growing part of our work over the last three years. So you can imagine that this type of product and this type of architecture, using to technical implementation grew out of manufacturing, or a little bit out of aerospace defense, but seeing that it's used across industries as well. Now, I'd say over 70% of our new implementations are using DITA around technical applications, and only 50% of those are from where you'd expect to find them. We're seeing pretty exciting uses of DITA in government, publishing, and even other industries. From a technical origins, we worked with XML, that's SGML. We understand that the architecture really offers a lot of benefits. We've with hundreds of different implementations. The point of the presentation is not to talk about the implementations where they understood the business need, they understood the technology, they went out and got the software we've helped put in the systems. It's the thousands of non-implementations. Again, I can't emphasize enough, we formed our company on the technology first, not so much around the and marketing of driving new technology. It's the building of it. For every one implementation that we had where they thought it was a great idea and there's enough momentum to put in, we've teamed up with technical writers, technical publications managers, directors of technical publications. Typically, we had some plan in place to convert, let's say, frame environment or an interleaf environment, even some other publishing system into that. And it made perfect sense. But after all this research, after all this prototyping, we get these responses like, this is great, this is perfect, but there's no budget to do anything. Or even was budget. Just this team had real jobs. They had to work on the existing release of their technical documentation, and so we had to wait. It wasn't important enough to interfere with existing business. Oftentimes, mentally, when people see the time and effort and cost that's involved with putting in a new system, they'll come up with workarounds, find simpler solutions, or just go with some Band-Aid solution. It's important for a company, and then when we work and it's typically the CEO of a large company that's coming to us. It's typically not even a vice president that can just snap their fingers and get a product started. Typically people working in an existing environment, and we have to work with them not only on creating the right solution, also communicating that idea makes sense, and communicating that XML publishing, all these technologies are important enough to invest time and money in to people who don't care about data, who don't care about publishing, and don't care about the complexities that are behind the scenes. So, it is of the type of system that we're talking about. So when we talk about justifying a database publishing system, it's just that. It has an environment, there's typically content management, there's that goes out to multiple channels, there's data conversion involved, there's some training. And for people that's done a little bit of research on and did, they understand the complexities and the moving pieces to get a system like this in place. So we're going to go into the anatomy of each one of these pieces and the strategic pieces that have to be put in place to guarantee success. But this is what we're talking about in terms of this system needs to be implemented. And the process that's typically used, there's lots of permutations of this. See that there's some initial planning that goes into a first prototype that goes for requirements, then some prototypes where you have some drafts formalized, then it goes into a detailed design, then a final code, integration, test, and implementation. There's lots of permutations of this, but this is the type of system that should be envisioning when we talk about we need to justify it. the standard process that you're probably familiar with implementing it. There's more waterfall where it's just dealing with this last curve. There's more agile development where there's more skills in there. But the purpose of this talk is to talk right about the beginning, when you're dealing with communicating the concept of a new system before anyone has invested the time and energy. It might even just be a blanket statement saying that there's no budget to do anything. So we'll talk about putting in this type of system right at the beginning of the planning phases. And with presentation, there's probably about 40 slides here. If you need to commit to me, any point I'd like you to take from this is really this slide right here. We know that there's 4 necessary steps that really have to be taken in the right order in order to get a project approved. With option, when we've seen those quotes before, there's no budget. We found other solutions. We have to wait to the next release. It's because we cheated in this phase. A lot of times we don't go through and really understand what the pressing need is to put in a system. We'll jump right into trying to justify why a DITA-based solution is in place by trying to calculate return on investment. Sometimes we know that, I don't want to pick on Adobe or Frame, but sometimes we know that there might be some Frame fanatics that are really with the existing environment, or some people might be using Word and SharePoint, and we start formula argument against them. Or sometimes we start building, we start showing what can be done. You call us up, you call up Justice Systems, they'll gladly show you how a set of documentation can be formed in a proof of concept. What we find is you have to go through these steps in parallel, because if you start with dig in for a ROI calculation without determining the overall urgency, it's going to fall flat. Saying if you start showing the proof of concept, you start even putting in evaluation licenses, people are playing with it. If you address some naysayers that are going to be lurking out later in the project, or you don't have some numbers to justify the cost, the project will fail. And when we haven't gone through these steps in order, somewhere down the line, the project loses steam. So we're going to talk through is what these forces are, really starting with their urgency. And to illustrate this, and we all the time, we thought that if we could come up with a solution that would save people money to automate PDF generation and then create different profiles of outputs for different customers and automatically update a website through some XSLFO process out of XMetal, that we'd be able to people fall over for it. And then we, being technical people, we leaned a bit too much on this proof of concept. But then we jumped into what is kind of the state of the industry now is, well, no, you can't do that. You have to come up with a return on investment. And then coming from a site we worked on recently, that developed before we came on. They put a lot of time and energy looking at the personnel costs and non-personnel costs, the net cash flow, and they come up with a return on investment of 55%. What you think is fantastic. Where can you spend $1 and get a 55-cent return? And they did a lot of work and had a proof of concept to demonstrate it. Well, what I'm saying now is, this anybody. Nobody invest literally years of their lives converting to a new system, spending their in budget just based on a spreadsheet that's like this. point is that you have to create some urgency before you start justifying this. And so a typical situation is you'll have maybe a director of technical publications, an enthusiastic technical writer, talking to someone who is in charge of new budgets, and you can see just looking at him, he doesn't care about DITA, doesn't really care about technical writing, doesn't have a lot of time. And the typical, or in the past, I've been one of these two guys. You can, convert to DITA will have the following benefits. The content will be produced. We don't have to use this outside programming group. We'll have consistency across our publications. When you look at 5 years ago when we were using InDesign, and now we can standardize it across all of our publications. You go to any product, you'll see that there's a standard look and feel, standard branding. We can streamline our workflow. We increase content reuse, which we know is important. We can run, so we can use it many other ways, and we automatically push to the PDF and for web delivery. Now, for me, let's do it. But more than not, it looks like you're not doing your job. It's just, you're spending way too much time thinking about things that can't practically be implemented. You're spending way too much time, instead of working on the next release, spending your lunchtime on webinars, teaching how to justify projects, and you're really not going to get anywhere. And in general, if you read literature on how to get projects started, this is understood. What do you have to do to improve this? And next logical step, and this is where a lot of literature is being written now, a lot of outside consultants will help you. Even there's a lot of webinars just on this. It's, you need to justify this in terms of return on investment. So in a couple weeks, maybe working with a company to put some cost numbers, and you do some basic calculations on your internal production costs, and you come back the next week and say, well, in conclusion, implementing the will result in all benefits that we talked about before, but we've discovered that there's almost $250,000 worth of savings over just 12 months, yield an ROI of 50%. We've made some more conservative predictions and assumptions, and now it's 50%. How could you turn this down? We're going to be able, in 12-month period, to save $250,000. Not surprisingly, I've been in rooms where after the technical writers left, these technical writers are doing a lot of things. This is a smart guy. He's not writing, but he can do financial analysis. I bet you it costs us $5,000 a year just to keep around. Eliminate him. Well, that's where we'll get our savings. Other situations, work with technical writers, technical publication managers, product managers. Believe this from you. In some situations, we've had to come in and present the same numbers that have been determined in and your credibility in talking about financial although you might be capable of doing it, outside of the role of technical publications, it might be difficult for you to communicate. And another one is, sure, if you can get it in. A lot of these projects fail. Certainly fail to meet their initial objective. So the thing is, it's a waste of time in most cases to come up with justification, even to talk about something like this. For most, for the part, it's a waste of time to come up with this as well. You have to be able to answer the question, why do we need this DITA-based XML, or this applies to other type systems as well. Why do we need this new system? And if you can't answer that in one sentence that someone doesn't care about DITA, doesn't care about XML will understand, then chances are there's no sense going opportunities, reducing resistance, and starting some. So some real-life examples, things that have really created the urgency, have been situations like this. After the latest round of cuts from TechPubs is gone. No one else knows this latex. No one knows it is to begin with, but they know it's a critical piece. Implementing the DITA-based CMS will be able to automate our PDF process. Any outside of TechPubs is going to end this situation. So gone. There was a critical knowledge of some antiquated public technology. It has to be replaced. This urgency is in place. Then go forward with the identifying opportunities, reducing the resistance, and creating something. Another situation, we can talk to we're blue in the face about the benefits of reduced costs by putting in DITA for translation, reduce translation costs, but time again, preemptively companies won't do it. It wasn't China, I think it was Saudi Arabia. They couldn't ship their product until the documentation was translated into Arabic. What's important about this last sentence is we can't track our changes with our translation vendors without a base publishing system. This is the hardest one for me to do, but technically there's other ways that you could do it. So you certainly don't necessarily need DITA to track changes, and you don't need to change your editing and your publishing. But that was the thing behind getting this one particular DITA-based publishing system in place. And you have to find some initiative that's going on within your company that people understand, and then tack on this and make sure that it's in line with it. And the thing with me being technical is sometimes you have to oversimplify things. This one, it's happened even for one of my first jobs, worked for a telecommunication company, was switches that were being supported by this one carrier. We were obligated to send back and forth the documentation with XML. And everyone understood it. We had to work backwards from it. So the next question is, well, what if there isn't one out there? And in general, if you dig hard enough and you spend your time looking at what's important to your company and then working backwards to how your database will support that, they'll be better off than looking at what can be done and trying to match that to the company's objectives. And the thing too is, and it's something that I've tested, is don't emphasize and don't list and don't lay down what the system can do. Like actually I've been doing for the last 30 minutes. Focus on what you can't do. If you can talk about all these new things, how things can be done easier with reduced cost, a lot of times that's interpreted as, well, we're doing it now, and things are pretty good. Why do we have to incur the risk of putting in a new system just to do things a little bit easier? So all of these that were actual themed new projects. And that's a way to look at it. You have to develop a theme for your project that can be understood outside of TechPub's area, something that can't be done without it. We can't adhere to our contractual obligation without this system. We can't ship our order to China or Saudi Arabia without this system. We can't put our latex publishing environment without this system. And, that's the first thing that you look at, is switch around not what can be done with the system, also what can't be done. And then you have to consider the question, why can't it wait? Can't it wait 30 days? And in many cases, that there's an answer for this. So here you can do some digging. I think you can, in general, craft a education for this that's in line with your organization's high goals. But if you can't answer this one, you have to be patient. the timing of when you present these ideas and how forcefully you push and you pull in vendors to help you is pretty critical. And oftentimes it's important to wait to the right time. So don't worry. You can make up urgency, and you can make up a time horizon. Oftentimes we found that if you dig deep, you can find the urgency, and then oftentimes wait 30 days, waiting 6 months, waiting the end of the year is something that's practical as well. So, an inventory of our projects, without exception, that have been deferred or they haven't selected as architects, they haven't selected us to work with. A lot we've made a mistake. We've jumped ahead of ourselves. We didn't really establish that urgency, and maybe we get the proof of concept in. Then once it starts getting politically a little hairy, or people are moving to a new system, and you start getting some pushback. If you don't have that urgency to drive through, the project will fizzle. Conversely, when we look at the projects that we have in place, the systems that have been in place, they fall into one of these categories. And so this is what we look for. And this list has grown over the years. Big pharmaceutical industry, maybe 8-9 years ago, with structured product labeling, was the FDA regulatory compliance. Imagine it wasn't around November 2005, the FDA required XML submissions for labeling changes. So 2004, the beginning of 2005 was going to be really busy as we help pharmaceutical companies with this. It's a lot of work convincing them to do it, but 2006 is when it was busy. It was after the deadline, after they couldn't submit any new labels, that was busy. So the timing was off. Look at, and I'm telling you, whatever your views of federal state government spending, is sometimes the justification is, well, we don't use that amount from our budget by the end of the fiscal year, we're not going to be able to use it. Well, oftentimes that's enough urgency to get a project started, because return on the investment is, infinitesimal. It is if you won't get any return if you don't use it. Is being a big driver. Translation memory. There's an argument on how much actual translation savings you get by reusing XML components, but everyone understands that if you want to expand internationally, you have to translate your content. I know that it's expensive, so it'll help reduce the cost. Sometimes somebody coming over from another publishing group, another company, and done this before. He's the vice president. He wants to see this in place. That's enough to create the urgency. You can dig through and find for yourself. One is competitor comparison. You can find in your industry where another company is offering a profiled version of their content, a translated version of their content, mobile device content, and you can use this as in order to keep up with your competition. Often is sufficient. The other one that we've come up with quite a bit is poor quality or mistakes in output. It happens more when you've been around for a while, you have thousands and thousands of pages of documentation. Theoretically, there's going to be inconsistency across content that should be reused that's not. Being technical people, we put this in an XML database, you run X queries about it, and we find it. If theoretically inconsistencies, you'll if you start looking through it, and most of the time it has to be a programmatic process. But it's amazing how powerful when you work for a medical publisher and you slightly get off the side effects for patient sheet. Generally 3 years ago is different from the online version, or your manufacturer and the technical specification leaves out some of them, or there's an update in a marketing piece that shows the specification is different from a change in the engineering. If you find those differences, people outside of the technical publication world they'll understand it, and they realize that you're open to huge at least customer dissatisfaction, but oftentimes some liability by publishing different information. The other thing that you can do, depending on the industry that you're in, is it's enough for one customer that you work with, especially if you're a manufacturer, a chip manufacturer, and Dell requests something. If you're a aircraft, if you're an air manufacturer and a large airline requests something, that's enough to drive the urgency. And I tag this on at the end. Sometimes the cost savings, if you just jump into the ROI analysis that we'll talk about next, is so overwhelming that's enough to create urgency. It's typically only if your company is going through some financial problems, and it's the most important driving force. So as I ask, these are situations that have created urgency, for us. As we go through these webinars, and I've talked about this topic in the past, I have to ask, which one of either for an existing project or once you're just getting started, have you experienced has been enough of a theme and enough of an urgency to get a project started? So going to be our first polling question, which is of the following situations listed here, have you experienced any of them to get a project started? And I think there's also an option for other as well. So I'm not going to get to see it when the polling questions.
You also, Brian.
Okay.
I have to say them in about 10 seconds.
Okay. So in general, if there's any questions as they come through, you can send them to Avi, and if it's particularly pertinent, or if a couple questions that come in on the same topic, Avi can interrupt and we can talk through it before we go to the next session. Second, but to keep in mind, that's the first step, is urgency. You have that theme. Once you can answer the question, why are we doing this? Somebody who doesn't care about DITA or technical publication, we're first product to we have to translate it. In pushing to handheld devices, we need some way of using our content across our website, our printed publications, and these Android devices that have been part of our marketing strategy. Once you have that theme, at that point you can dive into just on the opportunity. And we've changed this over the years. It used to be identifying opportunities, but it really is the wrong direction. You have to be able to find overall theme, why this matters to your company as a whole, why is it important, and then justify it with the calculations. And so, these obvious ones that you look at, and there's webinars created, there's lots of literatures on how to do this. There's a few things that I want to point out. There's two sides of the business opportunity. The education. Tech leaders, IT people, systems integrators tend to focus on the reduction of the cost. And there are things like streamlining internal publishing costs, automating publishing tasks, streamlining processes, reducing content errors, also reducing long-term support costs. And those are a little bit easier to get your hands on because you have a sense of what you're spending on it. However, you can't ignore the other side of business opportunities, which oftentimes are much more impactful when you're trying to come up with an old business justification for getting a project started. And these are things that affect revenue, fast time to market, support revenue, new informational products, document products, and new distribution channels. The faster time to market comes up a lot for pharmaceutical companies, but applies to any company. I'll use the example for pharmaceutical. I think everyone understands when a new product comes out is a brand product. Companies charge a huge premium. There's lots of discussions to the degree to which that's appropriate. Until the patent wears out, then it becomes a generic drug. So it's a window in place. But what happens, the drug's available to be sold, and product documentation, the product insert, the labeling information, all that has to be approved by the FDA before they can actually sell it. So the time to create product documentation can be linked to the billions of dollars of revenue. Even if you just save 1 or 2 weeks or 1 or 2 months, that allows it to be sold more at a brand name price, to justify a text-based publishing system, 10 times over. And the reason why I bring this up is that's enough. Who cares if there's some internal cost savings? Because oftentimes this will dwarf in terms of financial benefits if you can tie this to new revenue. Sometimes, so you're let's go to premium support. Sometimes embedded information, on demand, customized information for your product configuration, people are willing to pay more for. And ultimately what comes down to this is a ROI calculation. People want to know a number. What's the return on the investment we're having for our project? And again, there's lots of discussions on this. I just want to bring up to make sure one understands what actually that calculation is. And there's 2 areas that I want to point out that often get people in trouble. The official definition of investment is have the business benefit subtracted by the cost of the investment divided by the cost of investment. There. You come up with this calculation, make sure you really focus on 2 areas. One is, how do you calculate the actual business benefit? One way, if you go to your accountant or someone financing, they're not going to have any chance. They're not going to give you guidance. But a general way to start, if you really understand, this would be come up with agreed upon cost of your operations. You'd come up with a general assumption the cost of producing your output is proportional to the amount of output that you have if you're not using a DITA-based system. And then multiply that by the reuse factor. So if 10 documents out there that cost $100 to produce in general, and it turned out that at 50% reuse, you could update and edit and review and publish just 5 units instead of 10 units to create that same output, you would save 50%. The second is you have to multiply it by a success factor. So theoretically, you think the return on investment, you come up with a number of 50%. At best, achieve 80% of your goals. And it becomes much more complicated than that. But in general, I wouldn't want, and one point for creating the urgency, don't use this and prance and think that this number is going to mean anything to anyone. You can't identify an opportunity with this ROI. Use it to justify a thing that people understand. Don't make it too complicated. Make sure that the business benefit calculation people will get and then just to consider multiply its success factor. You can imagine these can be much more complicated. And I'll show you, very quickly an example of some that have been put together in that. And we've this is available as a starting point. We give these away to anyone who asks, because again, it's valuable to justify some other things going on. You're going to be able to get a project started just based on this calculation. As we put together these ROIs, it's the primary public type. It's a little bit different based on the industry, and then we force people to look at the ROI average as well. Perhaps it's understood what the costs are going to be to pages, to convert pages, CMS costs, XML authoring costs, and inputs. You put in the pages you have, the more authors you have, the more different outputs you have, the bigger the cost savings are going to be. And I'm not going to go through this one by one, because the point of this discussion is this is a necessary piece, but it's by definition secondary. You have to get the urgency there in place. And either by asking Avi or sending an email to me, we can get out a copy of this to whoever's interested. But you see, it can get pretty involved in the ROI calculations. All of those have been established, and it's nothing more than 7th, 8th grade arithmetic to come up with. When you look at this, some difficult problems that people have with our ROIs, we'll get to in a little bit, but as soon as you throw out numbers like this, people that aren't experts in technical publications, aren't experts in IT, they're really going to start taking this apart. So we'll talk a little bit about this in the next session. At this point, most of your work is done. If you can have a theme in place, and you have the just the opportunity in terms of ROI calculation, then the next step before you start building anything is anticipating where you're going to get resistance from. And you are going to get resistance from the budget, IT standards, the end users, and also executive support. Or just to the executive managers, because you can address the overall urgency when it comes up. But from the budget perspective, a couple things that are worth noting is in calculations before, we took 50% return on investment over a 2-year period. Sometimes they're about 2 years. They want projects that return in 6 months. We talk about getting cost savings and revenue generation, but is not factoring in the risk of success. A couple things that are going to come up that you should expect is how you allocate your costs. Does it matter if you internal resources for server costs, for travel? And the other aspect of this is because there's 50% productivity increase, necessarily mean that it equates to cost savings. Before, where there's 50% productivity gain, but there's technical writers there. There's still going to be 5 technical writers, so unless you reduce them to 2.5, you're not going to see that. From a T standard perspective, after you have the urgency in place, after you have the justification from an ROI perspective, you can anticipate that there'll be resistance also from the IT group. The has to do with why you use DITA, or use XML. And this one, all I could say is be flexible. You have your hard set on that's built from the ground up to use DITA, but there's a corporate-wide initiative and agreement to use SharePoint. Even from a editing perspective, if you love XML, they have to stick with Frame. You can't jeopardize the overall success of a project just because of one standard or another. This technology has been around for a while, where DITA, not choosing DITA, choosing one CMS, choosing one publishing output, doesn't really affect the overall success or failure of the project. The only thing here, even if you have your heart set on DITA, you have your heart set on a particular outside company to help you, an outside CMS or even editor, this is the one area that you should be flexible on. The last point before we talk about the driving action to close up is, make sure that everyone understands what your action. What we said at the beginning, this is what we put together. We put together a system that infuses start writing, use DITA, so information can be reused across formatting documentation. Companies don't buy systems. They don't want a new system. They want to invest in a new process. Sometimes they want to invest in their content, so they want a content conversion project. Sometimes they want to invest just in an editor. Sometimes it's a publishing output. So it's pretty important that don't system implementation where nobody's interested in a new system in your organization. It might have to be a data conversion project, or it might have to be labeled a new XML editing system. And they'll come up with the right name. This whole concept was DITA CMS, authoring, single source publishing. There's different implementations. Make sure that you use the terminology that makes sense, not of the technology that you're purchasing, but for technology internal that makes sense to them. And the last piece is make sure that you demonstrate this. This example of what XML looks like using DITA, their integration with Documentum. It's a great. This system looks like. Nobody outside of IT, no one outside of tech pubs really cares about what it looks like. Time again, as a company, we spent weeks, sometimes months, converting data, configuring data, putting in a CMS, developing output, and we demonstrate the tools behind the scenes. Be interested in the tools behind the scenes. They will see the output. They see that in this situation for one of our customers, that this home on their website is generated from a DITA map, or that this content that's in their Flash application for getting people to buy these new Gulf streams comes from an XML source. So make sure that at the urgency, flexible with the IT standards, that you have the right context for your ROI, that you put in place some visual picture of what this project is going to be. And it would be the end result, not the tools behind the scenes. And to me, if you're building this huge man, someone on a hill, they come up, they want to see a vision of what it's going to look like. This would be like showing the shovels and the bulldozers that you created, not a picture of what it's going to look like in the future. So the last step, and this is where companies like Dakota and Justification help all the time, putting together a proof of concept, coming up with an action plan, coming up with a cost, through training. We're more happy to help people with that. We're very skeptical if you haven't done the work of identifying why this project is important. Then you justify the opportunity with some budgetary numbers. You've identified, and there are going to be pockets of resistance out there. And then you can start a proof of concept. no official budget given to you. There's no official sanction. You can see that if you really care and it really makes sense to do this, there's plenty of work that you can do in creating urgency, identifying the resistance, look at the justifying opportunity, and even going through the proof of concept without any official sanction or any official budget granted to you. So if you get to the point where you have 3 preliminary steps in place, what you have to do is realize that if it makes you put this in place and instinctually you know that your environment could be improved with a database publishing system, you should be getting something started. And the purpose of this demonstration is to hopefully give some ideas of things that you can work on in the phase, with real no budget. And so if the time is too long and it really looks like nothing's going to happen in the short term, focus on getting something in as a phased approach. And so, in summary, I said there are 2 or 3 slides that are really worth committing to memory. This last one is the second, where you can almost tell as you talk to somebody about their projects. You don't ask them what their justification statement is, but why are you doing this? And listen to their answer. And if it's more than 15 seconds long, chances that project's not going to do very well. They should be able to answer, well, what's the return on investment? And you shouldn't come up with that big spreadsheet thinking that it's going to be the urgency that's needed. It should be some is where you're going to increase costs, and again, or decrease costs. And it should be 1 or 2 sentences. Identify where the IT resistance is going to be, what the landscape is internally. You calling your project? Is it a system? Is it content conversion? Is it XML editing? Is it process change? You should have a visualization approach, whether it's a proof of concept, screenshot. It could be even sometimes an architectural diagram. And then be prepared. If you do your work in the steps be prepared. Someone asks, this is a great idea, let's start. How do we begin? And you have a plan to implement it with some schedule and some general costs in place. And a lot of this can be done without any official blessing from your company. At this point, covered the tip of the iceberg. There's hours and hours that can be discussed on the implementation details of this. But just remember, in 2 respects, we came up with this title that no budget, no problem. So you look at it, just because you don't have an official sanction, official budget, it doesn't matter. You can still get a lot done. But more importantly, as we got to this, if there's budget, it means that there's no problem, and it's your job to find that problem that warrants the urgency to get something started. So, if you don't budget to do something yet, it's your job to find the problem that has to be solved. Sometimes it's just repositioning. Sometimes it involves a little bit more investigation. At this point, just a few minutes. If there's any questions that have come in, any questions that are needed, be addressed. We have a couple minutes to go through them. As Bobby mentioned, copies of this, I think, recording will be available. I can make the slides available to anyone, and that spreadsheet you can send me an email, and Avi in email. We'd be able to get questions that aren't answered here, or if you need a copy of that spreadsheet.
Hey, Brian, I sent you one question if you open up the chat, and then there's another one in the Q&A section as well, if you want to open those up. From, I
is this: are there any templates available that we can use? The business justification statement, ROI, or sample plan for implementation. The latter two, yes. Sheet that I brought up is available. The important thing, though, is that don't rely too heavily on that. You can get caught up in all these assumptions and coming up with this return on investment calculation. It's a required step to justify your idea, but the important thing is there for the justification statement? And it's definitely no. It's your job to come up with the term that really makes sense. And if it sounds like a justification statement, it's probably not going to be effective. You know, think somebody who doesn't work with you, who's in another industry, and say, well, we need this DITA-based system, and you should be able to explain that. And that's much more powerful than any type of official justification statement or mission statement that sounds. And there are templates available, but they often sound a little too lofty and contrived to be effective.
I cut you off there, Brian. That's all we have time for today. Ends our webinar. Thank you again, Brian, for your willingness to share information and experiences. Also, thank you for everyone attending. We're glad you could join us and hope the session was helpful. Just as a reminder, I will send out the link to the recording after, as well as so you can view it and share it with colleagues or anyone else who might be interested. Know that we're available for any additional questions after the webinar. You can email Brian or myself at a time. And stay in and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks.
Brian, if you could stick around for a couple minutes, please.
Yep. So I'll just call you directly.